Picture this. You're sat in one of Britain's most respected courtrooms, watching a judge who spent decades sending criminals down without batting an eyelid. This man's seen the worst of humanity: murderers, fraudsters, the lot. Nothing rattles him anymore. But then, 3 little girls walk through those heavy oak doors, absolutely drenched from the rain, clutching a teddy bear, a tiny kitten, and a letter that's about to turn his entire world upside down. What happens next? Well, it'll have you questioning everything you thought you knew about strength, about family, and about the secrets we keep. If this story touches something inside you, even just for a moment, stick around till the end. Trust me on this one. So there he was, Judge Harrison, perched high on his bench on this absolutely miserable Tuesday morning. The kind of day where the rain just doesn't let up, you know? The courtroom had that distinctive smell-old polished wood mixed with stale coffee and decades of tension. He sat there, face like stone, eyes cold as ice, barely glancing at the case file being placed before him. Round the room, people were whispering nervously, fidgeting in their seats. But the judge, he couldn't care less. He'd seen everything in his 30 years on the bench. Brutal murders, elaborate corruption at the highest levels. Honestly, nothing surprised him anymore. He was immune to shock, immune to emotion. Or so he thought. Then, the door creaked open at the back of the courtroom. Now, doors creak open all the time in courtrooms. Right. But this time, something felt different. 3 young girls stepped inside, absolutely soaked to the bone. Their clothes were far too thin for this kind of weather. You could tell they'd not been properly looked after. The littlest one, couldn't have been more than 5, was clutching this ancient teddy bear. One of its button eyes was missing, and the fur was matted from years of being loved. The middle sister, maybe 7 years old, held a tiny gray kitten wrapped in what looked like an old tea towel. The poor thing was shivering. And the eldest 9 at most gripped a crumpled envelope in her small hands. Her lips were trembling, but her eyes were fixed straight ahead with this determination that didn't belong on a child's face. The judge glanced their way, his brow furrowing deeply. "Belief," he started, his voice sharp and dismissive. "This is a courtroom, not some lost children's." But he never finished that sentence, because those 3 girls just kept walking. Slowly, deliberately. Their footsteps echoed through the suddenly silent hall like a heartbeat. 1 step, then another, then another. The entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath. The prosecutor actually put down his pen. The defense lawyer stood there frozen, mouth slightly open. Even the security guards looked at each other, completely unsure what to do. Do you stop them? Do you let them continue? Nobody moveth. The girls reached the front of the court, and that's when the eldest spoke. Her voice cracked. You could hear the emotion trying to break through, but she pushed the words out clearly. "Our mum died this morning." Who's like that? 6 words that changed everything. The judge blinked. Once. Twice. Like he'd been physically struck. The girl lifted the envelope with both hands now, her fingers white from gripping it so tightly. "She told us, she said we had to give this to you, sir." Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. "She said it was important." The judge stared at that envelope like it was a bomb. He didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't blink. The room was so quiet you could have heard a pin drop 3 floors down. Then, ever so slowly, his hand reached out, trembling slightly, and took the envelope from her small fingers. He turned it over, and that's when everything changed. The handwriting. He recognized the handwriting. His face drained of color. His jaw clenched so tight you could see the muscles working. His lips parted like he wanted to say something. Anything. But no sound came out. Because he knew that handwriting, God, did he know it? It belonged to someone from another life. Someone he'd loved with everything he had. Someone who disappeared 20 years ago without a word, without a trace, without an explanation. And now, these girls. These 3 brave little souls standing in front of him. The realization hit him like a freight train. The room started spinning slightly as decades of buried pain and unanswered questions came flooding back. The judge stood up slowly, mechanically, like a man in a trance. He forgot about his robes, forgot about the courtroom full of people watching his every move, forgot about the case he was supposed to be hearing. His hands shook as he carefully opened the envelope and pulled out the letter inside. As his eyes moved across each line, you could literally see him crumbling. His legs weakened, his shoulders sagged. The words on that paper were tearing through 30 years of carefully constructed armor, ripping through every defense mechanism he'd built around his heart. Because the woman who wrote this letter, Sarah, her name was Sarashi, was the one who got away, the one he'd loved more than life itself, the one who vanished without explanation all those years ago when they were both young and foolish and thought love could conquer anything. He'd searched for her. God had he searched, but eventually the pain became too much, and he buried it deep, threw himself into his work, became the hardest judge in the district. And now he understood why she never came back. She'd been protecting them. Protecting these girls. His girls. Their girls. The letter told him everything. About the pregnancy she discovered right after she left. About her reasons for staying away. She thought his career was too important. Thought she'd ruined his life if she came back. About raising 3 daughters alone. Working 2 jobs. Barely making ends meet, but making sure they knew they were loved. About the cancer diagnosis 18 months ago. About her fight, her hope, her gradual acceptance, and about her final wish that if anything happened to her, these girls would find him, would have a chance at the life she couldn't give them. At the bottom of the page, in handwriting that had become shaky and weak, she'd written, "If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. Please do what's right not for me, but for them. They deserve a father. You deserve to know them. I'm sorry I kept this from you. I thought I was protecting everyone. I was wrong." The judge felt the gavel slip from his other hand and drop to the floor with a soft thud that seemed to echo forever. The courtroom remained absolutely still. The only sound was the gentle tap of rain against the tall windows as past and present collided in that one impossible moment. And this man, this powerful, feared, respected judge knew with absolute certainty that nothing in his life would ever be the same. Again, not his job. Not his reputation. Not his carefully ordered existence. Everything had just been blown apart by 3 little girls and a letter written by a ghost. He stood there, completely frozen, as if time itself had stopped just for him. The letter, still clutched in his trembling hands, spoke of lost years, of birthdays he'd never celebrated, of first days of school he'd missed, of scraped knees he hadn't kissed better, of bedtime stories he'd never read. The girls stood there side by side, their eyes fixed on him, not with anger, not with blame, but with this strange, heartbreaking trust that absolutely shattered what was left of his composure. The judge tried to speak again, but his voice came out as barely a croak. He looked down at the youngest girl, the one still hugging that battered teddy bear like it was the only solid thing in a world that had just lost its center. And something inside him that had been locked away for decades just collapsed. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet internal avalanche of emotion he'd been holding back for 30 years. He stepped down from the bench, one heavy step after another. Each footfall echoed through the silent courtroom like thunder rolling across empty fields. Nobody dared interrupt, not the lawyers who'd known him for years. Not the reporters scribbling frantically in their notebooks. Not the bailiff who'd served under him for a decade and had never seen him show even a flicker of emotion, because they all saw it happening. They saw the power drain away from the robes, from the title, from the authority. What remained was just a man vulnerable, broken, raw, facing the truth of his past without any of his usual armor. The judge knelt down in front of the three girls, bringing himself to their level, and whispered something only they could hear. "Whatever," he said. It made the middle child nod slowly, and her kitten purred softly against her chest. The crowd watched in stunned silence, but it no longer felt like a trial. It felt like something far more profound, a confession without words, a reunion without preparation, an unbearable ache of recognition and regret and hope all tangled together. The judge looked back at the door where the girls had entered and thought about the cold rain still falling outside, hammering against the pavement, and he knew, absolutely knew, they would never walk back out into that rain alone. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever again. The courtroom seemed frozen in time as the judge remained kneeling there. His mind was racing through memories he'd tried so hard to bury. Sarah, beautiful, brilliant Sarah with her infectious laugh and her stubborn independence. The way she'd challenged him, made him think differently, made him feel alive. He'd been a young barrister back then, ambitious and driven, and she'd been everything. Then one day she was just gone. No note, no explanation, just an empty flat and unanswered questions that haunted him for years. Now, he understood. She'd vanished to protect him, to protect his career, to protect these children from a life she thought would be too complicated, too scrutinized. She'd carried that burden alone for 2 decades, and it broke his heart into 1,000 pieces. The girls didn't flinch when he reached out gently, placing his hand on the smallest one's shoulder. She actually leaned into his touch, like she'd been waiting her whole life for exactly this moment. The eldest carefully handed him more papers from inside the letter, photos of birthday parties he'd missed, school reports with excellent marks, hospital records, drawings they'd made, stories they'd written. At the bottom was one more note in that same shaky handwriting. "If you're rereading this, it means I am gone. Please do what is right, not for me, but for them." Those words hit harder than any verdict he'd ever delivered from that bench. They carried the weight of a mother's dying wish, the hope that he'd step up, that he'd be the father these girls desperately needed. He rose slowly to his feet and turned to face the courtroom. His voice, when he finally spoke, was steady, now calm, like still water after a storm. "This court is adjourned until further notice." Then he looked down at the 3 pairs of eyes watching him so carefully and said, right then, "Let's go home." Not back to his chambers with their leather-bound books and expensive furniture. Not to some fancy house in the suburbs. Just home. Wherever that would be, as long as they were together. And for the first time in his entire career, the judge broke a rule, not because he was above the law, but because sometimes love makes certain things necessary, makes them right even when they're irregular. As they walked toward the exit, hand in hand, this man in expensive robes and 3 little girls in their rain-soaked clothes, the entire courtroom stood up without being told, because deep down, everyone there recognized they'd just witnessed something extraordinary, something that transcended law and procedure and protocol, something pure and real and utterly unforgettable. The doors closed behind them, and slowly the courtroom began to breathe again. People started whispering, wiping their eyes, gathering their things. But nobody would forget what they'd seen. How the toughest judge in the district had been brought to his knees by 3 little girls, a teddy bear, a kitten, and a letter from the past. Now, I should tell you something important. This story, every word of it is completely fictional. It's not based on any real court case or actual person. The characters, the situation, the courtroom drama, it's all imagined to spark emotion, to make you think about family and love, and the choices we make. It's meant to honor the judicial system, not criticize it. And everything here is dramatized purely for storytelling. But here's the thing. Even though it's fiction, it touches on something very real, doesn't it? The idea that we all carry secrets, that timing changes everything, that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is face your past and step up when you need it most. Makes you think, doesn't it? About the choices we make, the people we leave behind, the chances we miss, about how life can change in an instant, how 3 small children can walk through a door and completely rewrite your future. If this story made you feel something, if it made you think about your own family or your own choices, then it's done what it was meant to do. And if you've stuck with me all the way to the end here, well, I appreciate you being part of this journey. These kinds of stories matter because they remind us what is truly important. When you strip away all the noise and complication. Family, love, doing what's right, even when it's hard. So, there you have it. The tale of a judge, 3 sisters, and a letter that changed everything. Sometimes the strongest people are the ones brave enough to break, aren't they?